Proverbs chapter number 6, verse number 6. The Bible says, go to the ant, little bug, okay, crawling around on the ground. Go to the ant, thou sluggard. Consider her ways and be wise, which having no guide, overseer, or ruler, provideth her meat in the summer, and gathereth her food in the harvest. You guys know that I was gone last week. I had Jay Kilterbrand get up here and teach. I'm sure he did a tremendous job. One of the things you run into a lot while you are out camping is ants. Ants, bees, mosquitoes, gnats, and there's a lot of ants. And I killed, squished, happily, with my sandal, the biggest ant I've ever seen in my life. So I told my wife, I'm going to title this lesson today, Lessons I Learned from the Ant I Squished at Camping. But really what it is lessons I learned from the ant. There's a few observations here, some of them are here, and some of them that I just looked up in studying the ant. Because we're told here in Proverbs 6, verse number 6, look at the ant and learn from the ant. So we're going to do that today. The first thing I see, it says here in verse number 7, which having no guide, overseer, or ruler. And then in verse 8, provideth their meat in the summer, gathereth their fruit in the harvest. The ant does right because it's right. There's no one in charge of an ant colony. They just do what they're supposed to do because it's what they're supposed to do. You don't walk around and see little ant policemen arresting ants for being wrong. Okay? They just do what they're supposed to do because it's the right thing to do. There's 3 people in the Bible that just immediately jump to my mind when I think of this thought of do what's right because it's right. First one is Daniel. We know the story of Daniel. He is a captive slave taken to a new land, to Babylon, and now in part of the kingdom. He's an official in the kingdom in Babylon. And because some of those people that live there don't like the fact that this slave guy has been promoted over them, they know that he's a Jew, and 3 times a day, morning, noon, and night, he goes into his apartment, and he opens up the shutters of the window, and he prays facing Jerusalem to his God for deliverance for his nation 3 times a day. So they think, all right, we got him. And they go to the king, and as any guy can be, they appeal to his pride. And they say, King, we believe that you are the greatest king. We believe you're going to live forever. We believe you are a descendant from the gods. And now his head is swelling, and he feels real good about themselves. That you're the one that provides for us and keeps us safe. We want you to write a decree that for 30 days, nobody can make a request of anybody but you. Okay, so it sounds real good to a heathen king that wants to feel good about himself. He signs it. Yeah, let's do it. Anybody that asks from anybody but you gets thrown into the lion's den. Signs it off. Daniel, just like he's always done, the next time that cycle comes around, walks to his house, opens up the windows, and prays. He is an official in the government. He knows this law exists. They've announced it. They've made it public to everyone. So there was no question about it. And Daniel does what he's always done and prays to the true God, Jehovah. Not because there was anybody there. Daniel is a full-grown adult man, an employee of the king. He has every right to say, you know what, I'm here as a slave. This wasn't my choice. This is a law they made. I guess I'm going along with it for the next 30 days. He doesn't have mama to make him pray. He doesn't have daddy to make him pray. He doesn't even have a priest to answer to. He's in a different land. And he does what's right only because it's right. Of course, we know the end of the story. They throw him in the lion's den. God delivers him from it. We have 3 Hebrew boys in the same time. Okay, when the names are read off of the people that are taken captive from Jerusalem to Babylon, Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, which is Belteshazzar, I can't remember the other one's names. They're all listed together. This happened at the same time. King builds a 90-foot tall golden statue, tells the entire kingdom to come together and bow down to his statue. And 3 guys say, not happening. And the entire nation bows down to a statue, just go along to get along. And 3 guys stand up against the tide, against the current, against everybody else and say, that's not right. And when the music plays, they just stand there. They're not trying to cause a ruckus. They're not trying to be rebellious. They're just trying to do right. And again, they could bow down and pray to God and say, Lord, look, we're not bound to this statue. We're just trying to stay alive here. Can you recognize, our prayer being to you and not to the statue? Can you help us out? We're just going along to get along, trying to not make waves, but capitulating to the king and going along with everybody else and having the same look as the world. And they say, you know what? Not happening. We will stand. They get marched into the king. The king says, look, I'm serious. I like you guys. So I'm giving you one more chance to bow, and I'm going to send you back out there. And the spokesman, I don't think, I'd have to go back and look, I don't think the Bible tells us which one it was. But one of them speaks up and says, look, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. In other words, we know what we're doing. It says, our God is able to deliver us from your fiery furnace. But if not, in other words, he's able to, but even if he doesn't, we're not bowing down. There wasn't mama there to tell him to do right. Wasn't daddy there to tell him to do right. No pastor to tell him to do right. Just 3 guys that said, that's wrong, and it's not happening. Do right because it's right. Without having to have a set of rules and laws to live by, without having to have people that make sure you stay in line, do right because it's right. Each of these guys did right when no one told them to. All of them had been taken from their land, been told to live under a new set of laws. Joseph, as a foreign slave, has his master's wife come in and say, hey, let's go sleep together. And he runs out and he says, how can I do this great wickedness and sin against God? Not against daddy, not against the pastor, not against the lady's husband. He says, I will not sin against God. And he gets thrown in jail because he's falsely accused. But he did right with no authority to answer to, took a stand for God when no one would have corrected him for doing wrong. First thing I see from the ant is do right because it's right. The second thing that we see here, prepare ahead. The ant prepares in summer the food it needs to make it through the winter. There's a story in the Old Testament about King David. We all know King David. Up until that point in time, the children of Israel were still meeting at church in a tent. So when they left Egypt, of course in Egypt they had no place to worship God. When they leave Egypt, God gives Moses instructions to build a tent that they can pull up stakes and travel as they wander through the wilderness. So it's not a permanent building because they didn't have a permanent place. Well, now they've been in Israel, had their own permanent place for a long time, and they're still meeting in the tent. And the tabernacle at Shiloh was the name of the place. David says, I want to build God a real building. I want to build a church, a temple, they called it, that we could go and meet in and worship in. God comes to David and says, you can't do that because you have killed too many people. And nobody that has done that is building my temple. So your son, Solomon, we'll build the temple. Now, David at that point could have gotten bitter at God. All the things I've done for you, and you're not going to let me build the temple? Been the greatest king, praised, all this stuff, and I don't get to build it? David could have got bitter at God. He could have got upset. But no, what David begins to do is assemble the materials Solomon needed. Said, I may not be the one to do it, but I know my son is going to have a big old job on his hands building this thing, and I'm going to get a head start for him. And he begins to assemble everything that was needed. He has all the material ready. So when Solomon comes to the throne, there's this massive stash of gold, of wood. There's a rock quarry where they've been chiseling out stones to set this thing. It's all ready. He prepared for his son what he could not have for himself. I've done lessons on this before. I'll do a lesson on it again when we get back to that time of the cycle. I grew up in a Christian home. I had a Christian dad, Christian mom. Never one time heard them fight. They never yelled at us. We had discipline, but we never got yelled at. We never got belittled. Never was demeaned. And grew up in a great home. Because my dad didn't. My mom told stories of hiding behind furniture while her dad beat her mom. So my parents, as they were growing up, decided our kids won't live like that. And they began to read the Bible. And they began to pray. And they got faithful to church. So much to the point they were coming on Sunday night and Wednesday night. And going to youth activities. Being at church as much as they possibly could. To prepare a future for me they didn't get to have. There's guys in this room, and you're not growing up in a good home. You're not growing up in the best situation. And if it could be changed, you would wish it to be different. You know, it can be for your kids. You can begin preparing a life for your kids that you didn't get to have. He started getting the material together that his son was going to need. Some of you need to begin preparing now for something that you can't see in the future, but you understand, okay? Look at it this way. I was working on a message to preach sometime in church, and I put this thought into that on a whole different message. But you guys are 14, 15, 16, correct? Okay? You understand that means, hey, we have a sovereign God that has a plan for your life. You understand that? Okay. Most guys, God intends for them to get married. You understand that? Do you realize just by process of thought here, the wife God wants you to marry is alive now? Have we ever thought of it that way? The wife God wants you to marry is alive now. So how many couples do you know that are 17 years apart? So your wife is alive now, most likely. And there are a few instances that people have like massive age gaps. I know of a couple. But I know of thousands of married people, and I know of like 2 that have a massive age gap. So most likely, your wife is alive right now. Are you preparing to be the husband she needs? If God doesn't come back in the next 10 years, most of y'all in here are going to have kids. Are you preparing to be the father they need? Prepare your life ahead. The ant goes around all summer scavenging food, and in an ant colony, they have a food storage location for winter because they know it's coming and they're getting ready. What are you getting ready for? What are you preparing ahead for? So the first thing we see is that an ant does what's right because it's right. Second, an ant prepares ahead. Third, ants can work with other people. Ants march in line, work together to accomplish a common goal. How many have seen a line of ants going around the edge of a building? And they're just all marching in line. We've had them in our house before, and it drives me nuts. But they'll find a piece of food. They have little messengers. Okay, they have little messenger ants. and they'll send one out to find food. When he finds it, he comes back, tells the rest of them, and off goes the line. So if you see one little tiny ant by itself in your house, kill it. Because if not, he's going to go back and tell the rest of them, I found food. And then you're going to have this little line marching. So the ants work together in a group for a common goal. They bring food into this storage area that we just talked about with no regard for who's going to eat it later. There are hundreds and thousands of ants in a colony. They don't march back, sometimes millions. They don't march back and have their own little private storage. It all goes into one for the common good of the entire colony. It has been said, the best leaders were the best followers. Because if you cannot work with others, nobody will ever want to work with you. I looked this up this week. The largest continuous ant colony, where there's no break in it, right? So if you go underground, there's a continuous string of ant colony. The longest one is 3,700 miles long ant colony underground. It starts in northern Italy, goes all the way through France into Spain. 3,700 miles, one continuous colony of ants. There's billions of ants working in that group all together for the same cause, for the same reason. It doesn't happen without a bunch of ants with a God-given ability to get along with others and work towards a common goal. They are an ant. They're pre-programmed to know to do that. But in God's work, there are no lone wolves. Brother Dave, the guy that gets up here and does prayer requests, he is my bus driver. How well do you think that my bus would happen if me and him didn't like each other and never agreed on anything? Never agreed on the order of pickup. Never agreed on who should ride the bus and who shouldn't. How fun would that bus be to ride? It'd be terrible. Because you have to be able to get along with people. Last week, I was gone, right? So I told my bus workers, I don't think you need a substitute captain. I think all of you are more than capable of pulling off a bus route week without me. So I didn't get anybody to take my place. So Ethan Kane, which some of you guys know, tall, blonde-headed Ethan, he is more than capable, in my opinion, of leading a bus. He's 16. So he did. He ran the bus for the week. In the morning, he realized, we have no breakfast. So he asked Brother Dave, my driver, to stop at Walmart. He went in and bought cereal. On the way home, they're like, what are we going to do for lunch? So he went in. They went back into the store. One of my other bus workers bought meat and bread. And they had sandwiches on the way home. They figured it out amongst themselves. There was no fighting over who's in charge. There was no disagreement. They just knocked it out, worked together, and got it done. Can you work with others? Living for yourself is a lonely existence. And you cannot be a bus captain, a teacher, a pastor. You cannot usher the front door of church without being able to get along with other people. This is why the lesson series that we just did in the month of June on Nehemiah, why he was able to get the wall built so fast. Because he could work with other people. He could assemble a team, construct an order, put together a hierarchy to accomplish a great work for God because he could work with other people. Well, first, you do what's right because it's right. Second, you prepare ahead. Third, you learn how to work with others. And then fourth, the thing that I see in ants is discipline. Ants have to work in natural seasons that are going to happen. In summer, they must gather food because in winter, they must hibernate. So in the summer, they must stay in their role and fulfill what they're supposed to do. Philippians 3, chapter 3, verse 13, Apostle Paul says, "Brethren, I count not myself to have apprehended." In other words, I don't think I'm where I'm supposed to be yet. So I count not myself to have apprehended, but this one thing I do, forgetting those things which are behind, reaching forth unto those things which are before, I press toward the mark for the prize of the high calling of God in Christ Jesus. He said, I know where I'm going. I know what I'm doing. I'm not getting distracted. Nothing's getting in my way or getting me off course. I'm serving God. He had the discipline to press through, to push through. He talks about the times when people tried to kill him. 3 different times that he suffered shipwreck. You understand this is before steel boats, and he's in a wooden boat, and the boat is in a storm and gets blown to smithereens 3 different times. Once he got bit by a poisonous snake. He's punching through all of this stuff to continue serving God. He has the discipline to push through. The last 2 actually kind of tie together. 1 Corinthians 9, verse number 27, the same guy, Apostle Paul, says, "But I keep under my body and bring it into subjection." In other words, he's saying, my body, my emotions, my spirit doesn't tell me what to do. So I keep my body under subjection, lest by any means which I preach to others, I myself should become a castaway. That is what he's talking to a young preacher here, and he's saying, I discipline myself and keep myself right, because if I don't, while I am teaching all of you guys to live right, I'll fail myself. And all of us are the same way. It says I have the discipline to keep myself right. And a kid on my bus right now that I deal with all the time, because he flies off the handle like that. And I tell him all the time, the biggest thing you have to learn in life is to ignore people. Because there'll always be someone trying to drive you nuts. Always. Learn to ignore people. Have the discipline to stay focused, to stay on track, and to keep yourself right. And I've only got a couple minutes left, so we're going to get the last one out. And these 2 tie together. So the last thing I see is persistence. And so persistent. How many of you, I used to do this all the time as a kid, how many of you have ever walked along a sidewalk and you see the cracks? Sometimes it's just the splits that they make for how they formed it. Sometimes they cut stress cracks, or just one grows from settling. And there'll be this little itty bitty like this round anthill popped up in it. Okay? And you just use your foot and you just brush it off the top.
Yes.
You go back a couple days later, guess what? It's back. Because that little anthill that you saw on the top is just the surface. The regular ant colony is underneath. The truth is, you destroyed the surface level, not the actual colony. When somebody comes along, how easily do they knock you off your foundation? What's underground, that ant colony underground, where they're building out their little tunnels for all their little houses and all their little food storage bins. That's the real ant colony. What you saw was just what was on top. So when you go back to school here in a few weeks, or you go back to your neighborhood, and somebody mocks you for being a Christian, are they destroying your faith?
No.
Or just knocking the top off? Is there something down deep inside where you've gotten with this book and you know what you believe? I know what I believe, and nobody's talking me out of it. But I'm 39. I've been doing this for a while. I've been reading the Bible for a long time. Nobody's talking me out of what I believe because I found it in here. So it doesn't matter what man's opinions are. I couldn't care less. I will stand before God someday for what I found in here, not what they thought of me. That is why I want you guys to have these. Get a foundation. Get something in your life that's real. And when somebody tries to confuse you, when somebody tries to talk you out of being a Christian, or somebody hurts you deeply because you are, all they've done is knock the top off. They didn't destroy what's down inside. They didn't destroy the God that you met with that morning. Sure, it hurts to be misunderstood, and no one wants to feel like an outsider. I get it. I was the same way. But when you have a real relationship with God, and you've built that foundation deep inside, this is what Jesus was telling the people about in Matthew 7. We know the story, like we sing this song, on your bus, maybe the wise man built his house upon the rock, the foolish man built his house on the sand. That is a parable about foundation. What is your life built on? And ants go way down into the ground so they have a good foundation. And you might be able to knock the top off, but you're going to have a hard time destroying the colony. Has bad eyes closed? Do what's right because it's right. Plan ahead for your future. Learn how to get along and work with others. Be disciplined in your life and in the structure of your day, and be persistent to not let people knock you off track for God. Lord, I want to thank you for